What position are the Pelicans most likely going to upgrade through a trade? Could a double big lineup work? And before we can even rank the Western Conference, there's one big domino that needs to fall. I'm answering your questions in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans at NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with y'all on this Tuesday. That's right, we are back here at Locked On Pelicans to 5 days a week. I went to Twitter, X, looking for your questions. You delivered on these. We got a lot to talk about this week. Got a fun live show planned as well. It's going to be great. I cannot wait. So let's get right into it here in just a moment. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, breaking down everything you want to know about the team. Media Day is less than a week away. I got some fun stuff planned for that. So we will have a primer for you on Monday. This week, we're going to be tackling a lot of your questions, turning them into shows as well. So I appreciate y'all making Locked On Pelicans part of your day. If you want to support the channel, comment down below on YouTube. And of course, become an everydayer. Listen Monday through Friday. Tell a friend about the show too. So let's get into topics inspired by y'all here. This was a general question I think that I got a lot, and it was, what position will the team look to upgrade? Guard, wing, big man, center. What are they really looking to try and do? And I think you can make a case, honestly, for almost any position. The guard depth in terms of like a pure point guard is a little bit thin. We learned last year that floor general CJ McCollum was not really the way to go. He works much better off ball. But if you need someone to run the offense, you kind of have Jose Alvarado. That's the one person you can trust. I think they hope Dyson Daniels will step into all of that. But if you need kind of a lead guard, one doesn't exactly exist on this team in terms of the point guard. You can have some scoring guards in CJ, yeah, but Jose is a little bit undersized, lacks some of the shooting prowess that you'd like, even though, yes, he can shoot. And so you could make the argument they need to upgrade the guard position. When it comes to wings, you have Brandon Ingram, you have Herb Jones, you also have Trey Murphy, who's out now to start the year, injured after the meniscus surgery that he had. There's Najee Marshall, who at times is good, at times is a little bit shaky, and you can't rely on, at least when it comes to his offense. Maybe they'd like to upgrade that position. You can never have too many two-way wing players. That is absolutely for sure in the modern today's version of the NBA. So could they upgrade at that position? And I wouldn't put EJ Liddell there. I think he's more of a big man than a wing player. So more depth there is never a bad thing, because those are the type of players that often win you games and make you a competitive team. So sure, you could see them upgrading on the wing. They also maybe need another big man, and we can kind of combine this with center, but I think it's worth noting these are different kind of positions in my mind here. You have, Zion Williamson at the 4. Brandon Ingram can play there. So can Herb. So can Trey Murphy too. So you're kind of covered there. You have Larry Nance Jr. that plays, but he's more of a center than a power forward in the traditional sense. And we'll talk about that in the next segment here of, could they do a double big lineup? Could you run Jonas Valanciunas and Larry Nance Jr. out there? Not sure about that, even though they've experimented, and I have the numbers behind it, and that's going to be coming up in the next segment here. So yeah, you could add some depth there, because other than that, it's kind of just EJ Liddell. And I don't really want to put Larry Nance Jr. in that 4 spot necessarily. He's more of a small ball 5. So then at the center position, you have Jonas Valanciunas, you have Cody Zeller, you have Larry Nance Jr. too. but we know they kind of maybe want to get a better fit for this roster than Jonas Valanciunas. So if you're kind of putting odds on it, the type of player they've been kicking the tires on the most this offseason is definitely the center position, making calls about Miles Turner, making calls about Jared Allen, and maybe some others as well. So certainly they're looking to do that. We talked about Buddy Hield on the show last week. They could use more three-point shooting, being one of the worst three-point shooting teams in terms of attempts volume last season in the league. Buddy Hield's arguably one of the best shooters in the league. I don't even think it's arguably. He's one of the best shooters in the league. They could maybe make a move from him that shores up some of your guard position, but when you think about it, as I said on that show, I don't think Buddy Hield actually makes a ton of sense. He's a defensive liability. He's only going to give you 3-pointers. At this point, I don't know, just play Jordan Hawkins instead and let him just get those shots. It's a rookie you drafted in the lottery. You may as well try and go with player development as opposed to Buddy Hield, who's, on the wrong side of 30. And doesn't play defense, doesn't rebound, doesn't do other things. Works well off ball, but you drafted Hawkins to kind of be that guy. You may as well start investing in him now and getting him live reps out there on the court. So all of this is to say it's kind of a question mark at any position what they want to do. Also, Hield's expiring deal, I think maybe presents a problem for the Pelicans of would he resign, would he not? What amount of money are you willing to contribute to him when he is a free agent, given some of the limitations of his game? So I think that is something that might kind of scare them off, and they don't really have salary that makes that deal work without kind of turning this into a trade that turns over half the roster, which is just not going to be a realistic thing. All of this is to say there's question marks about any of these positions that they could trade for, but that's, I think, the point. The reality is I don't think they're targeting one position. I think they're looking for the right opportunity, whatever it is, and you kind of figure it out from there. One of the best ways to win in the NBA is not through scheme. It's not through fit, right? It's kind of a talent-driven league. If you have players that are talented, you make it work around them. It's why you often, particularly in the lottery, draft best player available versus drafting for fit or for need and just go with the most talented guy, especially in the top 5, let's say, top 10, but especially in the top 5, top 3, top 4. That's what you do, even if it kind of has some redundancy on your roster, and then you just kind of figure it out and make it work. For the Pelicans, who have some very attractive trade assets and some Lakers picks, their own picks, they also have a couple of Bucks picks and some intriguing young players in Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, others. I think they are looking to see, when can you just kind of make the right move? When can you almost buy low on a player that you wouldn't be able to get normally? Think the DeMarcus Cousins trade and how cheap that was. Basically, Buddy Hield matching salary and an additional first-round pick. So 2 first-round picks and matching salary for at times a multiple-time All-Star and a guy who was one of the most dominant centers we've seen in the league in recent years and who also had a 3-point shot. So I think they're just trying to kind of wait for that, a CJ McCollum situation where it's like, oh, this is too good to pass up for the value that we're getting for this guy. And the CJ trade ended up being kind of cheap. So I think that's what they're looking to do. And in tomorrow's show, what I'm going to do is let's kind of evaluate the Pelicans trade assets compared to some of the other teams and see where they stack up in terms of like most attractive trade assets. Are they waiting to see? And ESPN reported this, and I'm sure every team is too. So take that for what you will, and we talked about it on the show. Giannis, is that what they're looking for? I don't think Lillard makes sense for him, but there maybe is going to be another player that goes like, okay, hey, I want out and I don't want to be in this situation anymore. Trade me. And the Pelicans are going to be in a prime position to strike, but not if you use some of those, assets you have on like smaller moves that don't move the needle. Think about like the Lakers trades and what they did last year. And did that actually move the needle for them or not, but kind of used up all available assets that they had at that time and limited them making other moves? Could they have gotten into the Damian Lillard sweepstakes this offseason if they had an extra first-round pick or two? Maybe, maybe not. But would you rather have Damian Lillard or a chance at Damian Lillard or Beasley, who's not there anymore, Mo Bamba, who didn't play in the playoffs for him, and then Jared Vanderbilt, who's the lone guy kind of remaining, right? Sometimes you just need to pick your spots really well, and I wonder if that's what the Pelicans are doing It's not wonder. That's definitely what they're doing, rather than trying to kind of find the like identified need that they have, kind of take advantage of the market, if you will. And as a small market team, I don't necessarily think that that's the incorrect way to go. So there you go. What do you think the position they need to upgrade the most is? What do you think they're trying to upgrade, or do you think they're going to go and just kind of get the best player they can get, knowing that they kind of need to make a move and use some of these picks to kind of consolidate things a little bit? Let me know in the comments down below on YouTube. So coming up next, this one is a direct question. This was a great question. Double big lineup, 2 centers. Is this something they can do? What's that look like? I got the numbers behind all of this. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Before we do that, though, today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Snap into NFL action this season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. And if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is super easy to use. It's laid out well. They show you those same game parlays that I love. Hit the 50% profit boost on the LSU-Arkansas game. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL and the official sportsbook of Locked On. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, completely free, the #1 Pelicans podcast. If you want to interact with me more, join the Locked On Pelicans Insiders group on Subtext. I'm going to be using it a lot this week, going to be using it a lot on Monday, as we have Media Day, and there's going to be some interviews that you're only going to be able to see here on Locked On Pelicans. So I'm really excited about Monday and everything that's going to be happening and set up that way. So make sure you join it. It's a free 14-day trial. It's $4.99 after that. Look, give it a try for 14 days. If it's not what you're looking for, if you don't want to interact with me like that, totally okay. But you can message me directly back on that, ask your questions, pick my brain on things, and it's just going to be a way to have more fun with y'all this season and share inside info that I'm not going to put out there on Twitter just because it's rough to use. And if you don't like it after 14 days, that's okay. The podcast is still free and 5 days a week for y'all. Just come see us here and stay an everydayer on the show. So let's get into a question from Sam McKenzie here at Sam J. McKenzie, MacKenzie. And he says, outlook for the center position. Do you see any combination of Valanciunas, Nance, Zeller ever sharing the floor if the team is healthy? Whose minutes might suffer? Now, I don't think Sam is saying, let's see a 3 center lineup out there on the court of Valanciunas, of like Nance at the 3, Zeller at the 4, Valanciunas at the 5. Like, that's not what he's saying. He's basically saying, do you see 2 centers out there on the court? Because, as I said, I view Larry Nance Jr. as a small ball 5 since the trade from Portland. That's how they used him as well. So I dove into some of the numbers here because I was curious. And this goes back 2 seasons now. This goes back to the 2021-22 season where they ran a double big lineup with Jackson Hayes and Jonas Valanciunas as the starting lineup for a while, kind of done out of necessity to counter the Cleveland Cavaliers when they played them, I think in February. I might be mistaking that, in the season where they made the playoffs to play the Phoenix Suns. You know, no Zion Williamson there. And, you know, it was fairly effective in 1,001 possessions. It had a net rating of positive 4.8. So that's your offensive rating minus your defensive rating. To put that in a little bit of context, an overall team's net rating of 6 or better puts you in like conference finalists, NBA finals, like range. That's usually what you get. It usually is your starters are much higher than that 6. And then your backups and other lineups and different things, rotation players, drag that down a little bit and bring it back towards 6. But in general, that's kind of like the benchmark that you look for and that I look at with all of that. In that context, 4.8 is not bad, right? But it's not good because that's also your starting lineup and it should have been better than that. So it's not elite, but not terrible. The problem was they weren't good defensively. There was a lot of firepower there. Brandon Ingram was playing some of his best basketball. CJ McCollum was doing incredibly well for New Orleans, and they absolutely cleaned up on the offensive glass. The half court struggled otherwise and was the middle of the pack, but they were good in transition and they were good on offensive rebounds and putbacks. So those just kind of easy things, extending a possession. When you're running two centers, you better be good at offensive rebounding and getting those second chance points. And they were. Can you build an entire offense around that? Can you sustain that for a season? 1,001 possessions isn't terrible in terms of sample size, but the net rating kind of says not amazing, maybe not the route that you really want to go. And they weren't good defensively. They forced a lot of turnovers, which this Pelicans team has done a good job of doing under head coach Willie Green. But we saw it didn't do a ton in the postseason, and Jackson Hayes was almost non-playable in that Phoenix Suns series. And Jackson Hayes and Jonas Valanciunas didn't work this past season, 2022-2023. They had a net rating of minus 14.3, so really, really bad. It was limited possessions. It was right around 200 or so. So it wasn't a ton. But at the same point, it kind of says the year before was maybe just catching teams off guard. They weren't ready for it. And the Pelicans were kind of getting it done in other ways, which we don't need to get into too much. But that double big lineup didn't work with Jax and with Valanciunas. But what about Valanciunas and Larry Nance Jr.? This was the season, he came over at the trade deadline 2 years ago, wasn't really healthy until the end of the regular season, didn't play a ton. Now he was healthy going into the year. And if you remember when I interviewed him and had Larry Nance Jr. on the show, when they were playing the back-to-back set against Utah, he said that's something that the team was starting to experiment a little bit. So what if you sub out Jackson Hayes for Larry Nance Jr. and you look at the lineups featuring Nance and Jonas Valanciunas? Is it any better? No, not at all. The net rating was rough, minus 22.2. It's also such a small sample size that we really shouldn't pay too much attention to it. It was 134 possessions total. And the most used lineup with those two, which features Devontae Graham in it, was just 34 possessions. So you're getting into real small sample size theater here where one play can swing the numbers, the percentages in a direction. So that's not great. With Devontae Graham, they were a plus 8.8, but that's actually kind of deceiving. So the most used lineup of Larry Nance Jr. and Jonas Valanciunas had Devontae Graham in it, just 34 possessions total, a net rating of 8.8. That's above that 6, right? That's good, but it's deceiving because the offensive rating was literally in the 0th percentile. They allowed fewer points than that, but if your offense is in literally as bad as it gets, I don't know if we need to see a ton of that or if that's just enough to say this ain't going to work. Now, maybe, you're looking at these lineups too without Zion Williamson on the court, right? It's to kind of see what you can do when he's not playing because he's out injured or because he's resting. So you can do these maybe without Devontae Graham and have B.I., CJ out there and Trey. Maybe it's going to be a little bit better, but Nance and, Valanciunas don't shoot a ton of threes. Is spacing going to be a thing? Probably not, and that could be a problem for B.I. And when you look at Larry Nance Jr. in the possessions that he's used, or in the lineups that he's used in, all of them feature him at center, and they generally do well. There was one lineup where there was Larry Nance Jr. and Jackson Hayes that was solid, but it's also with Jose Alvarado, Devontae Graham, and Najee Marshall. Maybe Devontae Graham was kind of the key to all of this. And it was only 62 possessions, and it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't probably good enough to really read too much into it. When you look at Larry Nance Jr. and his most used lineups, with lineups with him in it overall were a positive 6.6. The most used lineup of CJ McCollum, Trey Murphy, Brandon Ingram, Herb Jones, Larry Nance Jr., 258 possessions, had a net rating of 14.7. That's kind of what you want to start to see. The next most used lineup, again, Devontae Graham is in all of these for some reason. Jose Alvarado, Devontae Graham, Najee Marshall, Zion Williamson, Larry Nance Jr., positive 41.8. That thing scored like crazy, didn't give up points. 113 possessions. There's too much noise there to really make any sweeping conclusions with this. But basically, this is to say, lineups overall with Larry Nance Jr. tend to do well when he's at the center spot. So that's how I think you need to use him effectively. So running him out there with Jonas Valanciunas just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me, and the data really does seem to kind of back it up. The one real thing that they struggle with, and I can pull the numbers up here, is giving up offensive boards and putbacks. That most used lineup of CJ, Trey, BI, Herb, Nance ranks in the 36th percentile when it comes to like giving up putbacks and things like that. That's not good. They're not rebounding well at all there, and that's something that definitely does need to improve, because we saw that kind of burn the Pelicans at the end of the season. They were the 50th percentile, so right in the middle in terms of defensive rebounding rate. That's not great. They need to be better about that. You can address that with like team rebounding, gang rebounding, some other things too, but I don't think the answer is running Larry Nance Jr. and Jonas Valanciunas, because I just don't think any of the data and the eye test backs it up to really says that that's going to be a good idea. But that's a good question from Sam. I really was interested in diving into those numbers, and I'm glad that question came up and I got to share them with you. So coming up next, a lot of y'all want me to rank the West. We can't do that yet. There's a real big reason why. We'll talk about that coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Join the Locked On Pelicans Insiders group on Subtext. 14-day free trial. Give it a shot. You just got to put your phone number in. You can text me. I see it all. I can respond to you. Give me your thoughts. Tell me what you want to see on the show. I'm going to share other info and interesting things that I find. And it's going to be fun to share all that inside info and interact with y'all more on a much personal level. There's going to be additional things there too, just for insiders. It's going to be a lot of fun. Subscribe. The link is down below in the video description and the podcast description. I'll also tweet it out tonight, tomorrow, so that you can see it as well. Okay. So final thing here. This was a question that came up a lot. Rank the Western Conference. Where do the Pelicans stack up? That's a good question. We'll definitely do that before the season starts. But things are kind of unsettled as of now in the West, and I do think we could get a resolution on this maybe like as early as Thursday, to be perfectly honest. And do y'all know what the question is? Do you want me to pause for dramatic effect? Where's Damian Lillard going to go? What is going to happen there? If he stays in Portland, they might try and be competitive. I think they want to transition to the Scoot Henderson era, certainly, and he's requested a trade, but if they don't get the right deal, do they keep him? And I don't know, what could that team do? That's a lot of firepower, depth at the guard position. They need, a center and some other stuff, but they're still an intriguing team that could do some things that, a healthy Damian Lillard could take you somewhat far, I think, with certain things. They've got Shaedon Sharpe there too. They like him. They got Thibault there as well. They still have Jeremy Grant. There's some talent there in terms of scoring. I don't think they're going to be good defensively, but there's some overall talent there that I think they could be competitive with. But also if he gets traded to a contender in the West, he's not going to go to the Lakers. We just talked about that. We looked at, you look at some of these other teams, like what team in the West really makes a ton of sense. Maybe OKC, Minnesota, no, Dallas, no, Denver, no, Memphis, no, Phoenix, it's not going to happen there either. Utah could add him, certainly, but do they even want that? Houston, I don't think makes a ton of sense. Sacramento doesn't need him per se. It's likely that he would get dealt to the East, to the Miami Heat. We've heard the Toronto Raptors trying to get into the mix on this as like a serious contender for his services. So all of that's to say, it's unsettled yet, because while I don't think he's going to go to the West, and we could maybe stack rank these teams a little bit and just put Portland at the bottom or say we don't know yet, incomplete, something like that. There's likely going to be a 3-team trade in some capacity. And so could someone siphon off a useful player or two that elevates them in one of these type of deals? If it's the Miami Heat, does Tyler Hero go to another team? Maybe. That, as much as, I'm not the biggest Tyler Hero guy, but he's a useful player. He's a good player even. That could kind of swing the balance of power with some of this. So I do think it's a little bit too early to do that, and we'll probably do that a little bit closer to the start of the regular season, I think, because I want to see how some of these rookies are going to play out too. If Wembanyama is as good as we think he could be. And look, they're moving Andrew Lopez to San Antonio to kind of cover him much closer. Well, that says something, right? If Scoot Henderson is the truth, like we all think he probably will be, well, does that kind of maybe change it a little bit here? Or some of the other guys that have come into the league, do some of the young guys on OKC take a step forward? Do the Clippers land James Harden, someone that they think they seriously want to try and go and get? And that's where his desired destination is. We need to see how Chris Paul works with the Golden State Warriors. Is he starting? Is he coming off the bench? Right? It feels like he's coming off the bench, but he's never done that in his career. Dallas just missed the playoffs entirely with both Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic. What's going to happen there? All of these are kind of big open questions that I think we need to see some training camp and preseason to answer before we can start to rank these teams and see where the Pelicans stand. But what we can do is rank the trade assets, which is what we're going to do in tomorrow's show. And a lot of y'all sent really good questions in, so I'm excited to use those throughout the rest of the week. Don't forget, live show Thursday at 7 p.m. Central. Interact with you live in the moment. Those are a lot of fun. I enjoy doing those with y'all. If you want to hear more about what the coverage is going to look like this year, go give a listen to yesterday's show. It's going to be great. A couple of y'all asked some really good questions, like what, if anything, makes this year's roster better than last year? I'm going to talk about that. We want to look at Jordan Hawkins, I think, a little bit more here as well. How important is it for a fast start? All of these are going to be things that we're going to talk about on the show this week and going into next week as well, where we'll have media day and a ton of topics to cover after that, including just maybe, some exclusive interviews you won't be able to hear anywhere else. So I'm looking forward to chatting it up, chopping it up with y'all. Make sure you join the Insiders. The subtext link is down below, and that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. Thank y'all so much for listening. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And as always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Let's rank the Pelicans trade assets in comparison to some of these other teams in tomorrow's episode. I'm looking forward to seeing y'all then.